So we're going to have, next week we will have the recording of John McCain's interview where he admitted this was all the truth, and we will also be asking Congresswoman Virginia Foxx about this. The following week, the 26th, we're going to have Dr. Gene Schroeder, and Rodney Miller has been moved to the first Saturday in October, which I think is the 3rd. I don't have it in front of me, but he may well be here in the studio. We'll be back after a break here on the Real News, Real News Radio. The website is therealnewsradio.com. Any clips like this that we play, you can go there. Like the FDR is over 20 minutes or so. We only played about 4 minutes. But we interviewed Dr. Chuck Baldwin. It's been probably, about a week and a half ago or so. I can't remember exactly.
It was a Tuesday. Was it August 25th?
I believe so. And so we want to go ahead and play that interview for you now. This is Dr. Chuck Baldwin on The Real News. FDR asked for the war powers to combat the economic crisis March 9, 1933, which Congress granted him. And from our research, I don't think for he or any other president operating under the emergency rule. He had the executive orders that Congress. And I've always really respected your opinions, and I know that you are a deeply religious person. I wanted to find out your perspective on this. Has the Constitution effectively been suspended since March of 1933?
Well, I think for all intents and purposes, the Constitution has been ignored for most of the 20th century, with very few exceptions. Unfortunately, once a president decides to enact an executive order or a signing statement or a presidential directive, seldom will a president who succeeds him remove those directives or signing statements from the books. So they have a tendency to accrue over the decades, and presidents will simply use whatever elements of those directives that they choose for whatever circumstance arises. So I think, for all intents and purposes, we have not seen a president that has been willing to abide by his oath to the Constitution in quite some time.
Well, I agree with you 100%, and once I started doing research on this subject, I was astonished to find that on November 19th, 1973, Senate Report 93-549 stated, and I quote, "Since March 9th, 1933, the United States has been in a declared state of emergency." So I'm asking, has our Constitution effectively been in suspension and still is, and the public is totally unaware of this situation, which I have found to be just amazing, because doing research into our Constitution and the history of our country, this was the first time that I had ran across this type of legislation and this type of information. And like I said earlier, I'm not sure if we got it in, I've always really respected your perspective on things and enjoy reading your commentary each week. So it was important to me to get your perspective on this situation.
Right. Well, thank you, Farron. And again, I think that, as I said, the presidents have, over most of the 20th century, and especially from when you look at Bush 1 all the way through the current president, we're now in a successive presidential run here where the abridgments to constitutional government just continue to worsen. And I think it goes back to what you said, that, a lot of these executive orders are enacted and they're never repealed, and then the president will, at his own choosing, pull out segments of those agendas for whatever the circumstances it suits him. And, because it's on the books, quote unquote, the Congress has yet to challenge them. The courts have yet to challenge them. And so they just kind of an ongoing carte blanche, do as you please, the kind of agenda that has taken over the executive branch of government.
Well, I certainly agree with you, and I think that is some excellent information for our listeners. And while we've got you, I wanted to ask you, we have covered the swine flu hype, the preparations being made for a possible mass vaccination campaign, maybe even mandatory. What is your thoughts on the swine flu pandemic, and what would you recommend in regards to trusting the government and accepting their vaccines?
Right. I would encourage everyone listening to really closely examine this information relative to a potential swine flu epidemic very carefully, and not just trust whatever the media says and whatever the government officials say. Because if you remember back in 1976, I think it was, I believe Ford was president then, we went through this before, where they had the so-called experts predicting this massive inoculation campaign was necessary to avert a pending epidemic, blah, 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 and they started, giving people these injections. Well, come to find out, the injections had never been tested. The people that were promoting the injections had never required that they be tested. It was virtually an unknown commodity, and yet they created this spirit of hysteria and panic in the hearts of the people. Well, then after people began to be injected, including some fairly well-known people, folks began to get sick. People were paralyzed, and several, if I'm not mistaken, 100 or more died, not from the flu, but from the inoculation. So I think we need to really be careful about allowing a media frenzy or a government program to create and instill fear in our hearts, and thus making decisions that we would not ordinarily make. And we need to be confident that when we get an injection, we know what we're getting, we know what's in it, we know who produced it, we know exactly it's been tested, and it's safe, etc. And in this particular case here in 2009, I don't think any of the above can be substantiated. They don't know that it's safe. They don't know what's in it. It's not been tested, and for people to submit themselves to that, I think is rather foolish. And the idea of mandatory vaccination should be anathema to every freedom-loving American.
Yes, I agree with you.
Hello, Dr. Baldwin. This is Brian. How are you today, sir?
I'm well, thank you, Brian.
Great to hear, and I also just want to reiterate what Farron said. It's truly an honor to be able to speak to you today. You've certainly done more than your share to stand up for the Constitution and liberty, which we greatly admire here at the Real News Radio.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'd like to get your perspective, sir, on the recent article that I read that you had written on the internment camps, in a conversation you had with a passenger on an airliner, in which you say he had witnessed some internment camps actually outside the window of your airplane.
Right. Yeah, that was an amazing conversation. I was flying cross country, and we were over Colorado somewhere. It was very barren, desolate, wilderness type of terrain. I did not happen to have a window seat, and as he was looking out his window, he turned to me, and we were strangers. We had spoken very little to that point, and so I was shocked that he would actually broach the idea, but he did. And he said, "Can you look out this window here and see what you think?" He said, "I can't help but feel that what we're looking at is some kind of internment camp down there." And of course, you're flying at 30,000 feet plus, and there's no way you can get detailed analysis from that far in the sky. But there's no question that what we were looking at